Hi guys, today I'm here with a classics book haul. It's been just under a year since I did my last classics book haul video. In fact, I think that was the last time I did a book haul. I've done little unboxings but never a book haul. I just don't tend to do them these days. But lately I have bought a lot of classics. I'm trying to be good on the book buying this year, but I also wanted to buy them now so that I didn't have to throughout the year, because that's when I get tempted to buy other things. So I'm trying to be good, and I bought quite a lot. I bought them online, I bought them in bookshops with gift tokens I had. I also bought some in charity shops. So I'm going to get into it and show you the classics that I have bought recently. The first books I want to show you are ones that I actually featured in a recent video I did on Penguin platform, which is the New Year New Books tag. I made all the questions and Penguin invited me onto their channel to talk about things like my bookish New Year's resolutions and the books I'm excited to read. So I'll leave a link to that in the description and in the end card and up here if you'd like to go and watch it, so you can go and do that. But these books are the brand new vintage Charles Dickens, which I have completely fallen in love with. They are so beautiful and I love vintages editions. They also did the Austen ones, the Bronte ones, which I own, and they've done Virginia Woolf, which I don't own, and also some Russian classics, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But these are brand new. They came out at the end of last year and they look like this. So we have Great Expectations, which I'm currently reading. I started this yesterday and absolutely love it so far. I'm so pleased I started reading it and can't believe I haven't already. It's one of the books that I want to read for my classics I want to read in 2018. So I'm glad that I finally started reading it, because I knew if I didn't do it now I probably wouldn't. I love the sprayed edges on these, and I think that the font is a really nice size in them too. They're not too small, because sometimes classics can have quite small fonts, and the end papers are really nice. Just absolutely amazing. There's also Hard Times, which I'm hoping to read this year, and A Tale of Two Cities, which is another one that I'm excited to read. I don't know if I'll get to this one this year, but it is one that I have really wanted to tick off my book it list. So I do think I'll get to it at some point. If I enjoy Great Expectations a lot, then I'm probably going to be more likely to read more Charles Dickens this year than I originally intended. There's also David Copperfield, which I can't say I'm too excited to read. It's one of the ones I'm probably not going to read anytime soon. And then Oliver Twist. I really like this cover. I think it's really bright and vibrant, and I really want to read Oliver Twist because I've heard of the story but I don't know a lot of the details, so that is why I would like to read it. And then the final one is A Christmas Carol, which I featured in my end of year TBR but never read, so I think I'm going to read it anyway this year, even though it's not Christmas anymore. I still feel like I want to read it, so this year will be the year I read A Christmas Carol, I am sure. Because I am trying to challenge myself this year, I bought two books that, let's be honest, really intimidate me, but I feel like that's a good thing. You have to read things that are outside of your comfort zone, and that is definitely something that I want to do. So these are the vintage Russian classics, and I got War and Peace and Anna Karenina, both by Leo Tolstoy. I just can't believe how big these books are. You could use these as doorstops. This is War and Peace. I love these covers and I'd quite like to collect them, but I feel like I'm going to read one of these before I buy another one and do it like that, because otherwise they're just going to be sat on my bookcase gathering dust, which I don't want to happen. So this one is translated by Richard Pever and Larissa Volokonsky, and I read the introduction to this and they said that some translations attempt to translate every single thing into English, but what they've tried to do is translate it in a way that really captures the essence of the book, even though it is an English translation of the original Russian, which I'm really interested to read. This one is 1,264 pages. I can't remember a time I read a book that big. I think the last one I read was Game of Thrones and they split them into two parts, so it doesn't seem as intimidating. I really want to read it. I really want to challenge myself, and I've watched an adaptation of War and Peace, but I don't remember a lot and I don't think I enjoyed it. I think it was the BBC miniseries from a few years ago, but I just couldn't really get into the story, so I feel like I'm going to have to read it and then watch the adaptation afterwards again. And then Anna Karenina I bought because so many people have been telling me to read it, but also because back last year I read Tash Hart's Tolstoy, which is about a character who is obsessed with Anna Karenina. So I wanted to read it and catch all the references that I missed and maybe read Tashart's Tolstoy again because I really loved it and I thought it was a great YA book, but I want to read the original, and these are so gorgeous, so I couldn't resist buying these. I then bought 3 books that are published by Virago, who I really love because they really champion women authors. They also publish Daphne du Maurier. They are the Daphne du Maurier publishers in the UK. So the first one that I bought was South Riding by Winifred Holtby. This has an amazing cast of characters. There is actually a list inside with something like, let me see how many pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages just of characters, and it's set in Yorkshire, which I love. Obviously I love Yorkshire because I love the Brontes and I have lots of family connections to Yorkshire, and I think it's going to be a really good one. And it's set just after the First World War, which I find a really fascinating period of history in terms of the change, and pretty much I think that the interesting thing for me is the change between the end of the First World War and what happens then between then and the start of the Second World War. That is something that I find really interesting. Things like Downton Abbey I love because that follows that period of history, and I also read Side with Rosie, which starts just at the end of the First World War, so I find it a really interesting period to read about. The other Virago book I bought was The Fountain Overflows by Rebecca West. I bought this because a Rebecca West Twitter account tweeted that I should probably read this because she's a really underrated author, so I thought I've got to read it. I really want to champion underrated classics authors this year and find the hidden gems of the classics world that maybe don't fit into our traditional image of the canon. So I wanted to read this, and I really like the way that it was described in the introduction, which is, troubled families have been a source of fiction ever since Greek tragedy, but The Fountain Overflows is one of the most interesting and engaging novels about childhood and family ever written. I love books like that, so I really feel like I'm going to enjoy this. And then the final Virago book I bought was Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, which is a book that I think is studied a lot in America, but I haven't heard a lot about. So I think I was doing a little Google, or it was her birthday or something like that in January, and I thought, why haven't I read her yet? So I'm looking forward to reading this one a lot. Zadie Smith described it as one of the greatest American novels of the 20th century, so that is enough to make me want to read it. Another goal of mine this year is to read more plays and more poetry, and I really want to read more Oscar Wilde, so I bought Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest and Other Plays, which includes Lady Windermere's Fan, Salome, A Woman of No Importance, An Ideal Husband, A Florentine Tragedy, and then The Importance of Being Earnest. So I feel like I'm going to read a lot of Oscar Wilde this year, but I did read The Picture of Dorian Gray last year, which was his only novel, and so I definitely wanted to read more from him, and I also want to make a video on him for my classic series this year, so I've got to get ahead and do my reading research, and I'm really looking forward to reading his plays and just finding out more about Oscar Wilde. For poetry, I bought Selected Poems by Alfred Lord Tennyson because I read The Lady of Shalott for my English class. We were studying The Picture of Dorian Gray actually, and we were studying how that parallels with The Lady of Shalott and certain allusions to it, and I really loved that, so I wanted to read some more of his poems, and I feel like his style is very similar to my own taste, and so I think I'm really going to love this. And then the other poetry / prose I got was Selected Poems and Prose by Percy Bysshe Shelley. I read Frankenstein last year, and I'm really fascinated by people like Mary Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Lord Byron, and that group. So I really want to read more from him, and I'm not sure if it's going to be my thing, but I also want to read it to test myself and to see if I'll enjoy it, and I'm interested to see more of the political romantic side of it. As you probably know, I love collecting different editions of books, so I've got all my Penguin English libraries behind me, and I've got a lot of the vintage ones as you've seen in other videos and this book haul. But another collection that I want to try and collect are these gorgeous F. Scott Fitzgerald books, which I don't think you can see very well in this light, but they are so beautiful, and I've had my eyes on them for ages. And I read The Great Gatsby, and I'm actually studying The Great Gatsby for my English Literature A-level, and one of the best things I find in order to kind of assert your confidence in the exam is to read something else by the author you're studying, because that way you know that you know their style and it's not just a one-off in that book. So I bought The Beautiful and Damned and and I'm looking forward to reading it, but I have heard that it's not his best novel. But I still want to collect these, and I'm probably going to buy The Great Gatsby once I've finished my exam, just to celebrate finishing studying it. Last year I loved reading North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, so this year I want to try reading Mary Barton. I also want to read Wives and Daughters, which I featured in my Classics I Want to Read in 2018 video, but Mary Barton was her first book, so I'm looking forward to reading her progression as a writer, because I've also read Cranford, but I didn't love that as much as I loved North and South. So at the moment I'm not really sure how much I love Elizabeth Gaskell's books, so I need to read more to make up my mind. Another book that I bought was The Awakening by Kate Chopin, which I studied I think a year ago now in my English literature class. We studied an extract for it because we have to do unseen prose, and this was one of the ones we used to practice that. And I really love this feminist stance that Kate Chopin uses in her writing, and how it feels quite empowering but also points out a lot of flaws in the way that we treat women. So I'm looking forward to reading the full text and seeing if that really shines through. Back in December I went on a bit of a charity shop crawl where I went around a few charity shops and tried to find lots of classics, and I came out with some very good books. The first being Shirley by Charlotte Bronte, which is one of my favourite books. In fact, it is my all-time favourite book, and I wanted another edition of it because I've got 2 other editions, and then I wanted another one that I can maybe write in or dog-ear the pages and just remember my favourite chapters, or this one is a lot smaller so you can just put it in your bag. So a lot of different classics serve lots of different purposes, and I wanted another edition. One that my mum gifted to me actually was this one, which is the Golden Book of Modern English Poetry, which is an anthology of lots of different modern poems and lots that I haven't really heard of. So for example, Francis Thompson, just opening up, I've never heard of as a poet. I've never really heard of John Davidson. I have heard of Robert Louis Stevenson. Seeker of Sassoon I've heard of, but I've never read anything from. John Masefield, Gordon Bottomley, William Henry Davis, Lionel Johnson, Herbert Trench. So many poets in here that I haven't really heard about in a long time, and some that I've heard lots about but I've never read. So I'm looking forward to reading this. I would say, as always with editions like this, they are very male dominated, and that really annoys me. So I will try and bite my tongue when I'm reading it, but I'm looking forward to discovering some new poets too. I then bought this lovely edition of Lord Byron poetry. I have absolutely huge Oxford World Classics edition, which is pretty much this thick, and this one I was really attracted to mainly because it is so beautiful, but also because it's a lot shorter and the poems are set out in such a way that you can actually read them without feeling like you are going to drop it on your toe and break it. So I really liked this, and I loved how it had this inscription in the side which said to MS from CNW, Christmas 1919. I thought it was so quaint and sweet, and I love old books, so I was really pleased with this find. And then the last book I have to show you isn't a classic, but is to do with classics, and it is The World of the Brontes, The Lives, Times and Works of Charlotte, Emily and Anne Bronte by Jane O'Neill. I love Bronte books, obviously. I mean, I talk about them in every single video, and you know this, so you pretty much should have known that I was going to feature something about the Brontes by now. This is a really lovely book with lots of illustrations in it, lots of really interesting facts and things like reviews of the novels, which I find fascinating. I think I've got a Jane Austen edition of this actually, so I'm looking forward to reading more into it and finding out different things about the Brontes, because every edition holds different facts and different things that the author finds important, so that's why I love books like this. So those were some of the classics that I have bought recently. I would love to hear if you've read any of them and if you've enjoyed them, or any classics that you have bought recently. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. Happy reading!